Once upon a time, in a vibrant African village called Mawimbi, surrounded by tall baobab trees and golden savannas, there lived a kind and intelligent girl named Zadii. Mawimbi was a lively and close-knit community where the villagers lived in harmony with nature. The air was often filled with the sound of children's laughter, the rhythm of drums, and the aroma of delicious stews cooking over open fires. Zadii was the beloved daughter of her parents, Akina and Omari. Akina was known in Mawimbi for her wisdom and kind heart. She would often tell Zadii, "You are my shining star, the greatest gift the ancestors have given me." Zadii loved spending time with her mother, learning to cook traditional meals, braid hair, and weave colourful baskets. Omari, her father, was a strong and hard-working man who adored Zadii. He often called her his precious jewel and encouraged her to dream big and be fearless. Life in Mawimbi was simple but joyful. Zadii loved her home, where everyone treated one another like family. She dreamed of growing up and making her parents proud, just as her mother had taught her. But one day, their peaceful life was turned upside down. Akina fell gravely ill, and despite Omari's desperate attempts to find help, she passed away. The light in Zawadi's world dimmed, and the once happy home was filled with grief. Omari did his best to comfort Zadii, but nothing could fill the emptiness left by Akina's absence. Even as Zadii mourned, she clung to the lessons her mother had taught her, to be strong, kind, and brave. Little did she know, her strength would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Life in Mawimbi slowly changed after Akina's death. Omari did his best to care for Zadii, but it was clear he was struggling with his grief. Wanting Zadii to have a mother figure again and hoping to bring some happiness back into their home, Omari decided to remarry. One day, he introduced a woman named Ayo to the villagers. Ayo was beautiful, with a charming smile and a sweet voice that easily won people over. At first, Zadii was hopeful that Ayo might bring some warmth back to their family. However, beneath Ayo's kind appearance was a heart filled with jealousy and cunning. She pretended to care for Zadii, smiling sweetly in front of Omari and the villagers, but her true nature began to show when they were alone. Ayo would scold Zadii for the smallest mistakes and make her do all the chores around the house. "You need to earn your place here," she would say with a sharp tone, while making sure Omari never saw her cruel side. The situation became even harder when Ayo brought her own daughter, Casey, to live with them. Casey was spoiled and demanding, and Ayo favoured her in every way. While Zadii was forced to work from sunrise to sunset, Casey sat comfortably, eating the best food and wearing the finest clothes Ayo could afford. If Zadii ever complained, Ayo would scold her harshly, warning her not to upset Omari. Zadii missed her mother more than ever. She often sat under the stars at night, whispering to Akina in her heart, asking for strength. Though life with Ayo and Casey was unfair and painful, Zadii held onto her mother's words. "You are my shining star, and no matter how dark it gets, you will find your light." Little did Zadii know, her strength and resilience would soon be tested even further. After Ayo and her daughter Casey moved into the house, Zawadi's life became much harder. At first, Ayo acted kind and loving when Omari was around. She would smile at Zadii and say things like, "You are such a helpful child," or, "I'm so lucky to have you as my daughter now." Omari believed Ayo cared for Zadii, and this made him happy. But everything changed when Omari wasn't there to see what happened. When they were alone, Ayo's true nature came out. She began ordering Zadii to do all the chores in the house. From the moment the sun rose, Zadii was expected to fetch water from the well, clean the floors, wash the clothes, and cook meals for everyone. While Zadii worked tirelessly, Ayo and Casey sat comfortably, eating the food Zadii prepared and laughing at her. If Zadii ever made a mistake or tried to rest, Ayo would yell at her, saying, "You're lazy and ungrateful. Do you think this house will take care of itself?" Ayo was especially cruel because she wanted Casey to have everything Zadii didn't. Casey was allowed to play all day, wear fine clothes, and eat the best food. Zadii, on the other hand, had to wear old, torn dresses and eat leftovers. If anyone from the village visited, Ayo would act sweet and pretend she treated Zadii like her own child. Zadii is such a blessing, she would tell the visitors, making everyone believe she was a kind and caring stepmother. Despite all this, Zadii tried her best to stay strong. She remembered her mother's words about being a shining star and kept telling herself that one day things would get better. At night, when everyone else was asleep, Zadii would sit under the stars and whisper her hopes to her mother. But as the days went on, Ayo's cruelty grew worse, and Zadii realized she would need all her strength and courage to survive. One day, Zadii's father, Omari, told her that he would be traveling far away for work. He had been given an important job in another village, and though it would take him weeks to return, he promised to come back as soon as he could. Zadii felt a heavy sadness in her heart. She didn't want her father to leave, especially because she knew Ayo's cruelty would be even harder to bear without him around. Omari hugged Zadii tightly and said, "I'll be back soon, my dear. Be strong and remember that I love you." With Omari gone, Zadii was left alone with Ayo and Casey. The days became even harder for her. Ayo took full advantage of her father's absence and treated Zadii like a servant. She gave her more chores to do and made her work from early morning until late at night. Casey, as usual, did nothing to help, enjoying the comforts of the house while Zadii did all the hard work. Ayo would scold Zadii for even the smallest mistakes, saying, "You can't even do one simple thing right." When Omari was away, Ayo's pretending to be kind to Zadii stopped completely. There was no one to defend her, and the house felt colder and more unfair than ever. Zadii spent long hours in the kitchen, cooking meals that Casey would refuse to eat, only to complain later about the food being too plain. Zadii would then clean up the mess, feeling exhausted and hopeless. Every night, after everyone had gone to bed, Zadii would sit by the window, looking out at the dark sky. She missed her father terribly and wished he would return to make things better. She also wished for a way to escape the cruelty she faced every day. But as the days turned into weeks, Zadii knew she would have to be even stronger than before to survive without her father's comforting presence. One day, Ayo's cruelty reached a new level. She became angry at Zadii for something small, something that wasn't even Zawadi's fault. Instead of scolding her like usual, Ayo decided to punish her in a terrible way. Ayo told Zadii that she had to go into the basement to clean it, even though it was already clean. When Zadii went down to the dark, cold room, Ayo locked the door behind her and told her, "Stay down there until you learn to be useful." The basement was small, with no light except for the little slits in the walls. It was cold, dark, and damp. Zadii felt a deep fear in her heart. She had never been locked away like this before. She called out to Ayo, asking her to let her out. But Ayo only laughed and said, "You're staying there, Zadii. I've had enough of you." For days, Zadii was trapped in that basement, with only scraps of food that Ayo would toss down to her. She tried to stay strong, telling herself that she would survive, but the loneliness and darkness were hard to bear. Ayo told Omari that Zadii had run away, making him believe that she had left the house on her own. He was heartbroken and searched the village for her, but no one knew where Zadii had gone. Meanwhile, Zadii was hidden away, unable to escape or even tell anyone the truth. Each day, Zadii cried silently in the basement, wishing for her father to return and for things to be better. She remembered the love and care Omari had always shown her, and she promised herself that she would never give up. Even though she was trapped, her heart stayed strong. Zadii knew she had to find a way out of this dark prison, no matter how hard it seemed. Days turned into weeks, and Zadii's life in the dark basement became her new reality. At first, she felt hopeless and scared. The darkness seemed to swallow her whole, and the cold air made her body ache. But as time passed, Zadii knew she had to find a way to survive. She couldn't let herself lose hope, even though she was trapped and alone. Ayo would sometimes toss down scraps of food for her, just enough to keep her alive, but it wasn't much. Zadii learned to make the most of what she was given. She would save little bits of food and try to make them last longer, eating slowly to stretch out each meal. The basement was dark, but Zadii grew used to the darkness. She would close her eyes and listen to the sounds from above, hoping for a sign that someone cared or would come to rescue her. Over time, Zadii became resourceful. She found an old bucket in the corner and used it as a makeshift seat. She also found some old cloths and used them to create a small bed on the cold floor. At night, she would lie on her bed and try to sleep, though it was hard with the loneliness weighing on her heart. Sometimes, when sleep wouldn't come, she would think about her mother, Akina. Zadii remembered her mother's words, "You are my shining star," and those words became her strength. She would whisper them to herself, over and over, like a prayer. Zadii also found small ways to stay hopeful. She would trace patterns in the dust on the floor, imagining that they were stars in the sky. She remembered the stories her mother had told her about the stars and how they could guide you even in the darkest times. Zadii would look through the tiny cracks in the walls, imagining that she was looking at the beautiful world outside. She dreamed of a day when she would be free again. Even though life in the basement was painful, Zadii never gave up. She held on to the hope that one day she would escape and be reunited with her father. That hope kept her strong, even when it seemed like the darkness would never end. Zadii learned to survive, not just with her body, but with her heart and mind, holding on to the belief that one day she would find a way out. One day, while Zadii was sitting in the cold, dark basement, she heard something strange. It was faint at first, but as she listened more closely, she realized it was the sound of voices. She quickly moved toward the small vent in the wall, a tiny gap where air would come in. It wasn't much, but it was her only connection to the outside world. Zadii pressed her ear against the vent, her heart racing. Through the cracks, she could hear Ayo and Kazi talking. They didn't know Zadii could hear them, and their conversation made Zawadi's heart beat faster. "I don't want Omari to come back and see that girl," Ayo said, her voice cold. "We need to keep her hidden for as long as possible. I'll say she ran away, and no one will know the truth." Casey's voice followed. "But what if he gets suspicious? What if he comes back soon?" Ayo's voice grew sharper as she replied, "Don't worry. He won't. I'll make sure he believes it. We just have to keep up the lie, and Zadii will never bother us again." Zadii felt a wave of anger and fear wash over her. She realized that Ayo was planning to keep her hidden forever, and that thought terrified her. But she also knew something else. This conversation was her chance. Zadii now had a small but powerful piece of information. Ayo didn't want Omari to come back yet, and she was lying to everyone about Zawadi's disappearance. In that moment, Zawadi's mind began to work quickly. She started thinking of a way to escape. She had been in the basement long enough to know the layout of the house. She knew there were windows above ground level, but they were small and too high for her to reach. However, she also remembered a small old wooden door hidden behind a pile of old boxes. Ayo never used it, and it led to a back alley where no one ever went. If she could somehow get to that door, it might be her way out. Zadii began to plan. She would wait until Ayo and Kazi were distracted. They often left the house for a few hours in the afternoon, and that would be her chance. Zadii felt hope for the first time in a long while. She knew she had to be clever, patient, and brave to escape. Every day, she studied her surroundings, watching for the right moment to put her plan into action. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Zadii was determined to escape, and she promised herself that one day she would be free. After weeks of planning, the day finally came. Zadii had carefully watched the routine of Ayo and Casey, knowing that they would leave the house in the afternoon for a while. She felt her heart race with excitement and fear. This was her chance. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves, and moved toward the small vent in the wall once more. She listened carefully to make sure Ayo and Kessie were leaving. As she heard their voices fade, Zadii knew it was time. Using the strength she had built over the long months in the basement, Zadii moved the heavy boxes blocking the old wooden door. It was hard work, but she didn't stop. Every movement, every effort was for her freedom. The door creaked as she opened it, revealing the small back alley that she had always dreamed of escaping to. Zawadi's hands shook with nervous excitement. but she knew this was her only chance. She stepped outside, the sunlight feeling strange on her skin after so many days in the dark. For a moment, Zadii just stood there, taking in the open sky, the green trees, and the sounds of the village. She could hardly believe she was free, but she didn't have time to waste. Zadii moved quickly, staying close to the walls of the house to avoid being seen. She knew that if Ayo or Kessie found her, they would lock her away again, and she couldn't let that happen. Zadii made her way toward the edge of the village, keeping her steps quiet and steady. The road ahead was long, but she had no intention of turning back. She remembered the stories her mother used to tell her about bravery and strength. "You are my shining star," her mother's words echoed in her mind. "No darkness can keep you from finding your light." As Zadii walked farther from the house, she felt a mix of emotions: fear, excitement, but also an overwhelming sense of hope. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She was free, and nothing would stop her from finding her father, Omari. Zadii's escape was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one where she could finally be herself again. And as the village slowly faded behind her, she felt stronger than ever, ready to face whatever lay ahead. After walking for what felt like hours, Zadii finally reached the village where her father, Omari, was working. Her heart beat faster with every step as she thought of the moment when she would see him again. She had dreamed of this day for so long, and now it was finally happening. Zadii didn't know if he would be happy or shocked to see her, but she knew she had to tell him the truth about everything that had happened with Ayo. As she entered the village, she asked people if they had seen Omari. The villagers pointed her to a small house at the edge of the village where her father had been staying. Zadii's heart pounded in her chest as she walked toward it. When she finally saw him, he was sitting outside looking tired. His face lit up when he saw her, and he stood up quickly, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Zadii," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Is it really you?" Tears filled Zadii's eyes as she ran to him, throwing her arms around him. "Papa, I've missed you so much," she cried, holding on to him tightly. Omari hugged her back, not letting go, as if afraid she would disappear again. After a long moment, they pulled apart, and Zadii could see the concern in her father's eyes. "But how did you get here? Why did you leave?" Omari asked softly. Zadii took a deep breath and looked him in the eyes. She knew she had to tell him everything, no matter how painful it was. "Papa, I didn't leave. Ayo. She locked me in the basement of our house. She told everyone I ran away, but that's not true. She was cruel to me, Papa. She made me do all the work and she even hurt me. I was trapped there for so long." Omari's face changed as he listened, his eyes filling with shock and anger. "What? That woman? I can't believe it," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry, Zadii. I should have been there for you." Zadii nodded, her heart heavy with the truth she had carried for so long. "I just want you to know, Papa, I never left. I was forced to stay there, and Ayo lied to you." Omari took her hand in his face full of regret. "I promise you, Zadii, I will make things right. Ayo will pay for what she did to you." Zadii felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had finally told her father everything, and now they could work together to make things right. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt safe and loved. With her father by her side, she knew they could face anything together. When Zadii told her father the truth about Ayo, Omari was determined to make sure the cruel woman was held responsible for everything she had done. With a heavy heart but a strong will, Omari decided to go back to the village with Zadii. He knew he had to confront Ayo and expose her for the terrible things she had done to his daughter. Omari gathered the villagers in the center of the village and asked Ayo to come. At first, Ayo tried to pretend that everything was fine, but when she saw the serious looks on the villagers' faces, she began to worry. Omari stood in front of the crowd, holding Zadii's hand tightly. "I have just learned the truth about what has been happening in my own home," he said, his voice strong. "Ayo has been cruel to my daughter Zadii. She locked her in the basement, lied about her running away, and treated her terribly for months. It is time for everyone to know the truth. The villagers gasped in shock, and many of them turned to look at Ayo with disbelief. Some of them had suspected that something wasn't right, but they never imagined it would be this bad. Ayo's face turned red with anger, but she couldn't deny the truth. "This is a lie!" she shouted, but no one believed her. Kessie, standing beside her mother, looked scared and confused as she realized that her mother's secrets were now exposed. Zadii stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "It's not a lie," she said, looking directly at Ayo. "I was locked in the basement for so long. I had no choice. But I'm free now, and I'm telling everyone what really happened." The villagers looked at Zadii with sympathy and shock, and many of them were angry at what Ayo had done. Omari turned to the village chief, who had been watching the scene unfold. "Ayo must be punished for what she has done," he said. The chief nodded, his face stern. "Ayo, your actions have caused harm to an innocent child. You will no longer be welcome in this village. You and your daughter, Casey, must leave immediately." Ayo's face twisted with rage, but she knew she couldn't fight the decision. She had no choice but to leave the village. She grabbed Casey's hand and pulled her away, leaving the village in disgrace. The villagers watched them go, their eyes full of anger and disappointment. With Ayo gone, the village slowly began to heal from the pain she had caused. Zadii, now free from the cruel woman's control, felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She could finally start to heal, and she knew that with her father by her side, she would never have to face such cruelty again. The truth had come to light, and Ayo and Casey's punishment was the beginning of a new chapter for Zadii, one where she could find peace and happiness once more. After everything that had happened, Zadii felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. Her father, Omari, took care of her with all the love and kindness she had missed for so long. They returned to their village, where the warm sun and the friendly faces of the villagers greeted them. The memories of her time in the basement still haunted her, but Zadii was determined not to let them control her life. She was stronger now, and she had learned to be brave, even in the darkest times. Zadii slowly began to rebuild her life, finding joy in the simple things again. She helped her father with his work, and they spent many happy days together. The villagers admired Zawadi's courage and resilience. They saw how she had faced so much pain and hardship, but never gave up. She became a symbol of strength, and many people in the village looked to her for inspiration. One day, Zadii decided to share her story with the village children. She gathered them together under the large tree in the village square, and they listened as she told them about her struggles and how she had overcome them. "No matter how hard life gets," Zadii said, "you can always find hope. You are stronger than you think. And remember, you are never alone." Her words touched the hearts of everyone who listened, and many of the children felt inspired by Zawadi's strength. Some of the adults also came forward to thank Zadii, telling her that her story gave them courage in their own lives. Zadii realized that by sharing her pain and her journey, she could help others heal too. As time went on, Zawadi's life grew brighter. She started to feel free from the shadows of her past. She made new friends, helped the village, and grew closer to her father. Her relationship with Omari was stronger than ever. He had always loved her, but now they shared a bond of healing and understanding. Zadii knew that, no matter what had happened, she could face the future with hope and strength. Zawadi's journey was one of survival, but also of growth. She had faced cruelty and fear, but she had overcome it all. Her story of resilience became an example for others, showing that no matter what struggles one faces, it's possible to rise again and build a life filled with love, hope, and strength. Zadii had found her peace, and in doing so, she inspired everyone around her to never give up, no matter how hard life might seem.